The desert sun blazed with a merciless heat over the isolated village of Arvada, a forgotten corner of the world where ancient customs still ruled and silence was often more dangerous than words. Beneath a cracked and colorless sky, a young girl named Lala struggled to breathe. Her eyes, wide with terror and dust, were the only part of her visible above the scorching earth. The rest of her, fragile and trembling, had been buried, up to her neck, left to the mercy of the desert for the sin of infertility. Just 19, Lala had been married for only a year to a man who treated her more like property than partner. When she failed to give him a child, he dragged her into the wilderness and left her to die, a punishment sanctioned by silence and sealed by shame. Her own mother had wept silently, held back by the invisible chains of tradition. Her father had looked away, pretending not to see. The women of the village whispered prayers, but none dared speak. Lala's world, already so small, had collapsed entirely in a single afternoon. As the wind blew fine grains of sand into her mouth, she wondered, was I born just to be forgotten like this? Each hour passed like a lifetime. Her neck stiffened. Her skin blistered under the cruel sun. Buzzards circled above. Her thoughts wandered, to her childhood, to her dreams, to the doll she used to carry made from old cloth scraps. She remembered once dancing in the rain and how her mother had braided her hair gently. That girl felt like another lifetime. But this is not just a story of cruelty. Miles away, under the vast skies of Colorado, a rancher named Owen Callahan was preparing for another solitary day. One of 4 brothers who had each inherited a section of the Callahan ranch after their parents died in a fire, Owen had chosen to remain behind while the others drifted to the cities. He preferred the quiet rhythm of land and sky, the language of horses and wind. But behind that rugged silence lived a man who had once known deep loss. Years ago, his fiancée, Amelia, had died in a car crash just weeks before their wedding. Since then, Owen had buried himself in the dirt and toil of the ranch, trying to grow life where everything had once been burned. He had no family nearby, no children, only the wind and wild animals for company. Yet, beneath his silence, a fire still burned. He never imagined that a desperate cry would soon bind his fate to a girl halfway across the world. It began with a letter. Or rather, a photograph. A visiting journalist who had been documenting rural justice systems posted a blurred image online, a girl buried in sand, her eyes filled with silent screams. It wasn't meant to go viral. But it did. And Owen, while scrolling through his feed after dinner one night, stopped cold when he saw the image. He couldn't sleep that night. He couldn't eat the next day. Something inside him, something deeper than reason, refused to look away. He reached out. Sent messages. Made calls. And then, when no one else would act, he booked a flight. With his savings, he left the comfort of his life, flying over oceans and borders into a country he had never seen, chasing a face he couldn't forget. What Owen didn't know was that Lala had survived the first day. Then the second. A shepherd boy had spotted her but was too afraid to speak. By the time Owen, with the help of a local activist named Faridha, located the outskirts of the village, she had spent nearly 3 days exposed to the elements. When they reached her, her lips were cracked, her eyes rolled back, but she was breathing, barely. Owen and Faridha dug with their bare hands, shaking and crying, ignoring the threats from villagers. The sand was packed like cement, and the hours felt eternal. By the time they lifted her from the grave, she had no strength to speak. But her tears said enough. At the clinic, Lala hovered between life and death. Doctors said it was a miracle she survived. Owen sat by her bedside, day and night, learning to pronounce her name correctly, whispering stories of Colorado's wild horses to her sleeping form. Faridha translated, but sometimes words weren't needed. Compassion, after all, speaks a universal language. Lala's nightmares were long and jagged. She screamed in her sleep, flinched at raised voices. Once, she woke up and tried to run barefoot into the cold night. Owen found her curled near the barn, shaking. I don't belong anywhere, she whispered through tears. You belong here, he said gently, wrapping his coat around her. You belong to yourself first. In time, she healed. Not just her body, but her spirit. She had been thrown away by her husband, by her village, by the very people who should have loved her. But here was a stranger from across the world who saw her as human. Lala, for the first time, felt seen. The courts dismissed the charges. There was no law protecting her. But Owen refused to return to America without her. Come with me, he said quietly, standing beneath the warm light of the hospital window. Not because you owe me. Not because I saved you. But because you deserve a life. Lala looked at him, her eyes full of questions. And for the first time in years, full of hope. She agreed. The road to America wasn't easy. Paperwork, interviews, delays. But Owen never left her side. They flew back to Colorado where she was met not with suspicion, but with kindness from the community he called home. The 3 other Callahan brothers returned when they heard the story, moved by what their quietest sibling had done. They converted part of the barn into a studio for her, after she showed them how she painted to cope with her memories. Her art began selling. She started sharing her story, in quiet halls and community centers. Word spread. One night, after speaking at a women's shelter, a young girl came up to her, crying. I thought I was alone, she whispered. Lala embraced her. You never are. She visited hospitals. Sat beside girls recovering from burns, assaults, broken bones, broken hearts. Her story, once buried in silence, now gave life to others. She held the hands of mothers who had lost daughters. She wrote letters to girls she'd never met, leaving small paintings in each envelope. Every time she stepped onto a stage or picked up a paintbrush, she wasn't just telling her story. She was digging out other women from invisible graves. Years passed. Lala and Owen married, not out of obligation or rescue, but love. She still couldn't have children. But they adopted 2 girls from a war-torn country, raising them among horses and stars. Each morning, Lala would stand barefoot in the pasture, letting the wind carry her prayers. Not to any god in particular, but to the world. A silent thank you to the stranger who saw worth in her when she couldn't. One daughter became a doctor. The other, a lawyer fighting for women's rights. Lala often sat on the porch, watching them with quiet tears. And one summer afternoon, standing in the golden fields of Colorado, Lala told her story to a group of students who had traveled from around the world. She ended with these words. Pain buried me, but kindness dug me out. You never know the power of a single hand reaching into the darkness. Be that hand. Be the light. The students applauded. Some cried. One girl hugged her for 10 full minutes. Owen watched from the distance, his eyes full. In a world where cruelty is often loud, this was a whisper of goodness. A reminder that love is a choice. That strangers can become saviors. That a rancher who had every reason to stay silent chose instead to act. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to change the ending. And sometimes, buried in the silence of pain, lies the seed of the most beautiful kind of rebirth.